Hello, and thank you for joining us on this week's Ask TCW podcast. My name is Aaron Lord. Today's date is Wednesday, the 8th of March, and we'll be answering your questions after this short piece of music. Yes, thank you very much for joining us for this evening's Ask TCW podcast. We'll get the elephant out of the room straight away. We have had a lot of questions, obviously, regarding the Dave Sims incident. So just to let you know that there will be quite a few questions about that, and we will be talking about it shortly. But I'm delighted to say that joining me on this podcast is Tina Taylor.
Hiya.
Andy Haywood.
Evening.
And finally, Jono Bullard.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, one and all. So let's get cracking straight on to the questions this week. Thank you very much for sending them in. And as always, if you would like to interact with us during this live podcast, then you certainly can do. Just get in touch with us via our Twitter handle at CatsWhiskersTV and just use the hashtag AskTCW, and we will read anything out that we get in during tonight's show. But we're going to start off with that famous word, webcasts, because we have had a question in from David Spence, and he says, how hilarious is it that after all the fuss of webcasts being needed, it bleeped up on a showpiece final? Tina, I'll come to you first on that one.
Hey, you can always rely on Spence for a good expletive, can't you? I think it's kind of ironic, really. I mean, I got a Facebook memory. It was either the day before or the day after or something. And I just felt it poignant to share it. You know, that last year's Challenge Cup final, you know, was on the BBC, and this year, all credit to Ice Time TV. I said it on Monday. They usually do a very good webcast, and you know, it's not very often that they let their viewers down. Obviously, technical problems happen. You know, as I say, you know, I mean, I don't really know what the sort of cause of it was, but you know, you'd have to assume that demand exceeded what could be supplied, and yeah, it did seem to fail in fairly spectacular fashion. So yeah, you know, I mean, in terms of growing the sport, you know, you've just missed a major opportunity there. You know, it's a webcast that, you know, probably only hockey fans would really know about it. I cannot see where any casual fans would have come from, you know, any sort of casual viewers that may have stumbled across it. And yeah, you know, you've got a high volume of complaints that have come in for people that just could not watch that webcast, and you know, from start to finish. So it makes me a little bit sad, to be perfectly honest. It's not. Again, you know, I just want to stress, I'm not having to go at the Ice Time TV guys. You know, it's the building that they work in, and they normally do a really good service. You know, really put a good product out there. But yeah, it did fail where, you know, a lot of people wanted it most, I think.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would just, like you say, you know, that the guys from Ice Time TV, they do a good webcast. But Andy, I'll come to you next, because obviously in the past you've mentioned that you're not sort of a massive fan of webcasts. You're not one of those people that reckons webcasts is something that we desperately need to do and the league should back, etc. So does what happened for the Challenge Cup final kind of just add to your views there?
Yeah, I think it does. Ultimately, I just think that there's so much more that should be done for the sport before webcasts. You know, don't get me wrong. I can completely understand people's opinions of, you know, why people like them. You know, I can completely understand that. But to be brutally honest, I just get kind of sick to death of hearing the same moans all the time when there isn't one. And to go to Spencer's question, I genuinely think it's hilarious that with all the fuss of having webcasts, and we as a league we've shot ourselves in the foot, no doubt, with regarding the way that this cup final's been done, with regards the location of it, and I'll be honest here. I imagine the league themselves are incredibly grateful that Cardiff got to that final, because I think if Cardiff don't get to that final, then I think it just shows how crazy it would have been to have held it there. And that's no disrespect to the arena, it's no disrespect to the city, but can you imagine if a Scottish team and Belfast got to the final, or even if it was Sheffield versus Belfast, and they both had to go to Cardiff? It just seems crazy. And obviously, like Tina said, the year before it was on the Beeb, and this year it was put down onto the webcast, and it's gone horribly wrong. And I just think that it sums everything up about the league. But I do genuinely think it sums up the problems with podcasts. And yes, it might be a one-off, but if it's a one-off and it's your cup final, that's terrible. And that's not a slight at the people that run it. I'm sure that they do a very good job. I've never seen one, so I can't comment personally, but I'm sure they do a fantastic job normally. But at the end of the day, they've, for whatever reason, it's failed on the big day, and ultimately it's not good enough.
I mean, Jono, Andy just mentioned there obviously the thought of if Cardiff hadn't made that final, and that kind of leads us on to another question, and this one comes from Kenwyn Jones, obviously a regular Ask TCW podcast question sender-inner. And Kenwyn says, your thoughts on the venue, the game, and whether as a neutral fan was it a good advert for British hockey? And when did the CC become self-serve? And also, who was supposed to hand it to the winning team? So tying that into what Andy just said there regarding the fact that they must have been hoping that Cardiff made that final, and it would be a little bit strange if it was a Steelers Belfast final. What are your thoughts in regards to Kenwyn's question on the venue, the game in general?
Well, firstly, very quickly on webcast, my opinion is that there's only one body to blame, and that's the league, because they had a TV deal that they could have had and they chose not to sign it, and that would have solved all the problems. There you go, and that's all I've got to say on that. For the venue, I think they, like Andy said, I agree, they would have wanted Cardiff to get to the final, but with Cardiff getting to the final, it was too small, at 3,000 seats. And yes, they sold it out, and you would expect they would sell it out with the home team making the final in such a small rink. I think as a neutral venue, fine, but it's too small for a major final like that. It's too small, and I know people bang on about Sheffield and Nottingham, but really, where else could it be held? I mean, Sheffield, Nottingham, possibly Belfast, but then you've got to fly everybody over to Belfast, and then you'd really be wanting the Giants to make the final. And I think the Challenge Cup in the Super League days was held at the Odyssey Arena as it was then. And it sold out because Belfast got to the final. So, it's typical of this league, unfortunately, where they get so close to getting it right, so close, and then it just all falls down at the end. And it's so infuriating because we have such a good product that needs to be shown on a wider platform. And it's not happening at the minute, and it's such a shame. I think, as a venue, I think if it was to, say it was Nottingham, Sheffield, for example, then probably Ice Arena Wales is a decent neutral venue, because you would probably just about fill it for Sheffield, Nottingham, in 3,000 seats. Fair enough, because there's a lot who wouldn't travel. I mean, it's a 3-hour trip, so it's not.
I think for a cup final, though, I think a lot would.
I was going to say it is a final of a competition.
I don't necessarily think that a capacity crowd at Sheffield Arena would be the answer, but I do think that 3,000 at Cardiff would be too small.
I mean, maybe so. I mean, I suppose it's really difficult with the sort of rinks and arenas that we have throughout the Elite League, where really we come back to it, but like the playoffs, the ideal choice is probably Nottingham. It's central, and it's got 7,000 seats, and it's probably the best venue. But we already have the playoffs, and it would probably be unfair if we had the neutral Challenge Cup final as well. I think a lot needs to be discussed about it.
To be honest,
sorry.
Go. Sorry.
No, go on.
I was going to say, ultimately, for my own personal opinion, is the easy answer is that they go back to 2 legs again.
Yeah.
I mean, realistically, and I don't want this to come across as me being one of them people, but these changes only came in when we kept winning it consistently on the trot. So we went from round robin to semi-final to final, and then we win it 3 years on the trot, then all of a sudden there's a quarter-final thrown in there, and then we win it for a 4th year on the trot, and then let's make it a one-off final. I just think, yes, a one-off final in an ideal world would be brilliant, but I also think one-off knockout games would be brilliant in an ideal world, like the FA Cup, something like that. Would be brilliant, but unfortunately we can't justify it in this league. And I think as much as a showpiece final would be fantastic, and I know that a lot of people would rather have more of a showpiece final for the Challenge Cup than they would for the playoffs, and they'd like to see the playoffs extended into a series, but ultimately it's not going to happen. And I don't think people, certainly neutrals, is that it becomes 2 legs again. And both teams get a home tie, and it becomes capacity depending on who's in it. So if Cardiff are in the final again, they will sell out Ice Arena Wales, because they usually do for league games anyway, or they get very close for the league games anyway. If Nottingham and Sheffield are in the final, you're going to get a lot more people through the doors than a 3,000 seater in Wales. If Belfast are in the final, they're going to get a lot of people that turn up for a final in Belfast from Belfast. I just think that to me, it's the logical, and from a personal standpoint, in my own opinion, it sort of makes more sense than going down this one-off route and trying to find a venue that's suitable, knowing that it won't be in Nottingham because of the playoffs, and obviously all the stigma that comes around of hosting a neutral one-off final in somebody's home rink.
I mean, Tina, I'll come to you on this because, to give the league some sort of credit, a lot of people have said that the Challenge Cup needs revamping. It needs something to engage the fans in that competition again. And they've taken it, like Andy just described, obviously from a 2-legged final to a one-off showpiece final, and they've said that it could potentially move venues, either annually or maybe more than that. They've been to Sheffield twice. Obviously we were there the second time that it was there. A lot of Cardiff fans, a lot of Panthers fans, but the neutral section, hardly anybody there. So as a venue, it didn't quite work. They've obviously gone to Ice Arena Wales, 3,000, and it's sold out, and there's a lot of people there, and some people couldn't go there because it was quite small, like Jono described earlier. So where do you stand on the venue that the final would work in?
Wow, that's a big question.
Yeah, I kind of got off on a tangent there. I do apologise.
Yeah. It's like just one at a time, eh? No, I'm kidding. Right.
Answer any bit that you'd like to first.
Yeah, I'll just pick and choose. It's fine. It's not a problem.
Yeah. Go for it.
I'll try and answer what I can remember to start with. In terms of where I sit, I think I am a fan of the one-off final, but like Andy says, it just doesn't. It doesn't make any sense with the arenas that we've got, because you do just sort of for something of that size, you are looking at either either the NIC or the SSE arena. And obviously you've got your logistical issues if it's not Belfast that make the final. Everybody's got to get on a plane or a boat to get over there, so there's more of an expense. And plane fares are an absolute blooming nightmare when you book them months in advance. So getting over to Belfast with like a month's notice is it can be expensive, basically, because I think the airlines sort of cotton on to trends, and as soon as a few fans start buying, then the tickets all just skyrocket because they'll know that everybody's after them, after getting over there. But in terms of size, that's the kind of arenas that you're looking for. And of course, the two arenas are both ideally located for, city facilities and what have you. And, you can get to, once you're sort of in the right country, as it were, then you can get to those cities pretty easily, really. And, they're accessible. So I do have a little bit of sympathy with the league. But it does sort of end when you look at the competition as a whole. The competition as a whole is still it's woeful. Obviously we're getting the two new teams next season, so it's gonna mix it up a little bit. But are we still going to persist with this? Having shed loads of games just to knock 4 teams out. I suppose it'll be next season, which. I don't know. It needs a bit of a spark, and also it needs to be taken seriously. I mean, most other teams are doing it, and I think I'm right in saying that the only team that did any double up games is us this season for the Challenge Cup. That's got to stop. That really has got to stop. You can't. If you can't take it seriously, then don't bother. Because I think if the league isn't seen to take the competition seriously, then neither will any of the fans. I think part of the problem for Panthers fans as well is the fact that it's you get a £1 discount if you for booking your seat. Big whoop, quite frankly, and it's then you've got the double up games, and for me as well. I mean, I think there's some other teams that include the group games on the season ticket. Well, we don't, and we don't have any sort of facility for adding. For adding the season tickets, for adding it on to the season tickets. There's, for me, if I've just paid, X amount £100 out for my season ticket, the last thing I want to be doing in the first month of the season is shelling out for Challenge Cup games. It just really, really annoys me. So I mean, there's all sorts of things like that make. I mean, me certainly as a Panthers fan think, well, this competition is more hassle than it's worth. And so by the time you get to the quarterfinals and the semi-finals, I don't know, I've sort of lost my enthusiasm, and I lose my enthusiasm every time we pull every time we pull Sheffield in a quarter or a semi-final. It's just like, another 2 games against them, really, are we doing that? And it should be it should be a trophy that everybody is aiming for, but I think there's an awful lot of discontent about the competition, and it needs change. It needs serious change to provide a bit more excitement, and maybe, like Andy says, one-off knockout games are the way to go. Maybe you do a random draw, you play one person. If you've been drawn out first, it's your home arena. Maybe that would add a little bit more excitement to it. I mean, it would be less games as well, because if we're going to be playing if we're going to be playing each team, we're going to be having two groups of 6 for the Challenge Cup. It's just it's probably too much. I think it's just too much. Everybody's so focused on the league. I think the Challenge Cup needs some spark to it for anybody to take it seriously.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Kenwyn and Spence, for your questions. Kenwyn, I'm sure you're extremely happy that your team have won the Challenge Cup, and congratulations to you and them. But right, we shall move on, obviously, to a hot topic at the moment within the Elite League, and that is the David Sims comment the other day. We will be having a few questions on this incident, so bear with us as we go through the questions, and we will start with a question from Chris Maltby. And Chris got in touch with us and says, not sure if you want to give the Dave Sims issue any more airtime. Well, we will do, Chris. But I'd be interested to know what you think of Paul Wheeler's almost obsessive crusade / witch hunt against Simsy. I know that you, Jono, like me, follow him on Twitter, and whilst I fully support the feelings of most with regard to Simsy's comments, and despite the fact that he constantly annoys and winds me up, I do feel that hockey in the UK would be a poorer place without him on the scene. Paul Wheeler doesn't seem to want to stop until Simsy is booted out of hockey altogether. I appreciate that he has personal reasons for being aggrieved, but has Simsy gone too far this time? Has he had enough last chances? Jono, I'm going to come to you first on this one because I believe you've been in touch with Paul Wheeler and given him a chance to obviously reply to that question as well.
Yes, I have, because I do know Paul quite well. And I have spoken to him today, and I spoke to Chris as well, who sent in the question, and he was more than happy for Paul to have his right of reply as well, which is absolutely fair enough. I think we need to start this by saying that Paul. A lot of people know Paul from social media, from Twitter, and you can't get a lot of your character over in 140 characters, and a lot of people find him annoying, and I have told him myself many times, stop being a dick on Twitter. And he knows that. It's nothing he hasn't heard from me before. However, him and David Sims seem to have this real hatred of a relationship, and it's back and forth. However, having spoken to Paul and got to know Paul, worked with him, chatted to him a lot, especially over the past season or so, I sort of understand where he's coming from in a way. He has a lot of reasons why he feels the way he does, and he put an excellent post on THF, and I'm just going to summarise a bit of it, where he said, I'm not with most people yelling on this thread about free speech would define as heterosexual. I am attracted to both men and women in varying degrees, though more women than men. I have a female fiancée and will be spending my life with her. My younger brother is gay. My partner is bisexual. Most of our hockey fan friends are LGBT of one form or another. And yeah, that sort of gives a background into why Paul feels the way he does about what David Sims has said on Saturday night. And then I spoke to him. I told him about Chris's question, and he sort of sent me this reply, and he says, I noticed that there are people saying my attack on Dave Sims' comments is agenda driven out of some personal hatred. I also noticed that some of them are EIHL club PR people. Perhaps it's easier for them to attack me than accept that deep in the core they are part of a league culture that has some serious failings in the basic way it treats people. I asked those people, if someone consistently attacked the very core of what you were and got away with it, if someone tweeted the most vile personal abuse at you on sometimes daily basis whenever you commented about the sport you loved, if that person was allowed to continue to remain the face of the sport in your country and was defended by people who were supposedly your friends, if someone tweeted vile homophobic abuse like fag on a regular basis, insulted what you were, what your partner was, what members of your family were, what your friends were, and then your sport largely defended it and brushed it under the rug, would you remain silent in the hope of remaining in the in crowd of your league and hope they left you alone, or would you challenge them? Is being popular in the world of British ice hockey really that important to you? Is your sport more important to you than basic human decency? Because there are some in the EIHL, including some club officials, indeed some in my own home club, whose actions seem to say that the approval of a proven homophobic bully who is holding their sport back with his actions is more important than living as a decent human being. If you can honestly say that you wouldn't attack them or get guns blazing every chance you get, then maybe your priorities need reassessing, not mine. And David Sims' attitude and the condoning of fan accounts that make homophobic and sexist and racist jokes on Twitter, and fan banter, and your pretense of the hockey family that only allows people in it if they hold certain views and act in a certain way, your reluctance to criticise the game is what has driven people like me away from the game. It is what will continue to drive people away from the game. It is what is holding back the game from growing in the United Kingdom. If you are happy with that, so be it. So that's what Paul has had to say. I've said to Paul today, I think you are tweeting too much about it, which he accepted, and he obviously doesn't agree with me. But, that's his views. And Paul is obviously someone who feels very, very strongly about this. As he's mentioned, I think he said to me that his brother has recently come out as gay. And I knew that his partner was bisexual, and I think it's this sort of thing. What David Sims said does offend him. It doesn't offend everybody. It wouldn't offend me. It didn't offend me in the slightest. It takes an awful lot to offend me, but I accept that it will offend an awful lot of people. And reading social media, reading forums over the past few days, it's been pretty horrible, to be honest. There's so much being said on both sides, and there's some opinions that I feel need to change. There's just not enough accepting. And I like Simsy. I get on with Simsy. I will speak to him anytime. He's been good to me while ever I've been doing this, while ever I've been in Sheffield. He's been very good to me on a personal level, but at the same time, he cannot say the things like what he said on Saturday in public. So to answer your question, Chris, I think Paul is maybe going a little too far, but when he gives his reasons, as he has done, I think it's understandable why he is.
Okie dokie. Tina, just quickly, do you have anything kind of to add to obviously what Jono said there, and the kind of statement that Paul Wheeler has said himself, and the initial question from Chris?
Well, I mean, I've maybe not got anything to maybe directly add, but I mean, there's quite a lot surrounding it. I mean, Dave Sims and Paul Wheeler have had a very sort of public spat going on for some time now, and they don't like each other, they don't get on, and I can understand. I mean, they are similar in one way, in the fact that they both believe, that they both believe, with absolute certainty that what they're doing is right. They have, very strong. They're very strong views about everything, and they're very headstrong about those views. So that's one thing, and neither of them will probably thank me for saying this, but that's one thing that they have in common, I think. Let's just scale this back right back to the beginning. Let's this was never about a gay couple in the first place. This was a couple of lads who were joshing around because their girlfriends didn't want to go big on a kiss cam. So this all started out as a joke. Dave Sims made a joke, and unfortunately that joke was in poor taste to a lot of people. I think there were an awful lot of people who just let it brush over their heads, and it was like, oh, well, that was a bit of a daft thing to say. And there were a lot of people who got really offended about it. So, and that's human nature. I don't think the problem. I don't think the problem is UK ice hockey. I think the problem is attitudes. I think it's people's attitudes. It's a very sensitive subject when it's something that whenever there is a group of people who are, and I don't want this to sound offensive, who are different to the norm, and in this case it is people who don't go for the traditional male-female relationship, traditional in inverted commas. Basically, they're breaking out from tradition. It takes a very long time for acceptance to come, and they're fighting for it. And that it's going to be a long, hard slog until nobody flinches seeing a gay couple of either sex. I think it's going to be. There's still a way to go yet, and I think. I think the problem is this is a joke made by somebody who is sort of like he put it, comes from a different world. It's not like it's not so much a different world, but a different time where jokes like that were thought nothing of. And the problem is he hasn't evolved to recognise that attitude is no longer really acceptable. We're sort of getting to a time where this is all different. I think. I haven't seen much really of what either of them have been tweeting, because I don't follow either of them on Twitter. But I think if you make too much of a point about something, you can possibly lose the ground that you were trying to gain. You have to know where the balance is. You definitely do know how. You have to know where the balance is. I appreciate that Paul is personally invested, emotionally, and all the relationships that are important to him in his life mean that he is absolutely 100% invested in the views that he holds. You do sometimes have to put yourself in other people's shoes, but at the same token, Dave Sims needs to do that as well. He needs to recognise that he's a straight white male, and you can't say things like he has said and the things that people have highlighted that he has said. Those sorts of things are going out the window. One thing I will say about that is you have to, if you're going to make jokes like that, you have to know the people you're making the jokes at very, very well. I will give you a small example, and he's probably never going to listen to this because he's not a hockey fan. But a chap who I know through one of my best friends. He works at the place that I used to work at, and I've been out drinking with him a few times, and he will quite happily declare that he is camp as Christmas. But he can make that joke. But unless you know him really well, that's probably not something that you could say back at him. And there has to be a comfort level if you're going to make jokes like that. You just have to. You have to evolve. You have to be sensitive. But by the same token, if we get offended by every single thing that everybody has said, then we're all going to spend our lives miserable. So there's a certain amount of push-pull that needs to happen both ways, I think. There's a few people who there's a certain section of people that are saying, yes, Dave Sims shouldn't be in ice hockey, he's ruining the sport and all the rest of it. There's another section that is going, it was a joke, get over it. I think there's some middle ground in there somewhere, but you have to recognise that at this moment in time, the whole scenario is it's sensitive, and the people that David Sims is making a joke about, that was a flippant off the cuff remark for him, they are fighting a battle, and it's very personal to them. So you have to be aware of that.
Okie dokie. Well, obviously, Chris, first of all, thank you very much for sending that question in. And obviously, Paul, thank you very much for replying to Jono and having your say in relation to that question. Obviously, we're going to stick with this incident because we have had more questions. If you would like to get in touch with us and sort of air your views and tell us how you're feeling about the incident, and because I think obviously Jono and Tina, you've mentioned a lot of good things there about how society is changing rapidly, year by year, and when you think of maybe the years gone by when Simsy was born and what he's gone through, and the world has changed a lot in the last 5, 10, 15 years. So we are now looking at society a lot differently. So, get in touch with us via Twitter. It's at Cats Whiskers TV, and just use the hashtag AskTCW. Like I say, air your views. Let us know what you're thinking about it. Thank you very much for Elaine getting in touch, obviously, regarding the previous question about season tickets. We will read your response to us out a little bit later, Elaine, but thank you very much for getting in touch. And obviously, Richard Davis, you did make it just in time to listen to the show, so I hope you are enjoying it. But we'll move on to some more questions now. So this one comes from the Cage Forum, and it comes from Ping Chao Chi. I hope I've said that right. And they have I? That's good. It's not you, is it, Tina?
No, it's not me. It is somebody I know, though.
You? Okay, thank you. I hope their name isn't really Ping Chong Chi, is it?
Ping Chao Chi. No, it's well. I'm sure. I think he'd change it if he had half a chance.
Okay. So they ask, how much worse do you think the fallout of Sims's joke would have been if it had been aired live on national TV? And then the second part of the question is, do you think that the Elite League's complete lack of response to this incident is acceptable? So, Andy, I'll come to you first. So just answer the first part of that question for me, if you will, please.
Well, I think, again, I think it depends on audiences, as in figures. It would still probably get the same amount of complaints and outcries, but obviously there would be a more official sort of route around it, because they would go to the TV company or whoever was broadcasting it. So obviously, I think there would be a difference in the way it was handled, probably, because people would complain to the channel that was broadcasting it. And then obviously within that there becomes consequences, because the channel then go back to the league and say, that's unacceptable. We've had so many complaints about this. You need to do something about it. And obviously then the league might have to go down different routes. They might have to acknowledge it even. Obviously that's the second part of the question in regards, have the league done right by sort of not mentioning it? And it's tough, because I don't know whether they are or not. I would like to think that they should have said something, but by the same token, I think the things that have been said on official capacity from obviously Sheffield themselves and from Dave Sims himself are, they've been, they've come out and they've done press releases. I think Sheffield have had to do a second press release because the first one was inadequate. And by the same token, I can kind of understand why the league would think, well, you know what? Yes, he's employed by a club that play in our league, but he's not employed by us. It's up to Sheffield to sort it out, surely. But I do think that by just ignoring it almost and hoping that it goes away probably sets the wrong sort of precedent. But just to touch on something, and I appreciate that in today's world with social media and the way things travel ridiculously quickly and everything sort of snowballs because of how quick news spreads. I do find it odd, and don't get me wrong, I appreciate that what he said is wrong, completely wrong, especially in today's day and age. It's ridiculous, and just to touch on what Tina says regarding sort of knowing your audience, he's talking to thousands of people. He has to understand that there will be people in there that do find that in ridiculously bad taste. But one of the things that I've seen sort of floating around on social media and things like on websites and stuff is the sort of, not necessarily sort of mock outcry, but it's that sort of almost being offended for the sake of being offended. And obviously, to touch on something that's completely not to do with hockey, it sort of reminds me of the Russell Brand Andrew Sachs scandal, where there was like 30,000 complaints to the BBC about that radio show, and yet its core listenership was about 5,000, and it was almost like people were going out of their way to listen to it, to then be offended by it. And don't get me wrong, in today's day and age, with, like I say, with social media, that's become an awful lot easier, because ultimately you follow somebody on Twitter who was there or who's seen it, and all of a sudden it spreads like wildfire. And I can understand that it is unacceptable, but I do think that there are some people out there, and it's not all people, and obviously, you know, this definitely isn't at Paul Wheeler, because obviously he has a personal impact on himself. But there are some people out there that I've seen that are almost getting offended by it because they should be getting offended by it, and I kind of just think that there's kind of no need, because that sort of doesn't help the situation, I don't think.
I mean, Jono, you know, Andy just says there that obviously, you know, David Sims is an employee of the Sheffield Steelers, not of the league. So in relation to, obviously, should the Elite League have been more responsive in regards to this issue? And we've had another question from Chris Lovell, and he asks pretty much the same question: should the league have been more proactive in releasing a statement in regards to the Sims incident? Personally, as a gay ice hockey fan, I'm not offended. However, many people will have been, and the league seems to have stood still while this thing blew up around them. I feel sorry for Sims, as I have no doubt it wasn't meant in the context many people are taking it, but the league needs to be seen to protect its reputation. May I also add, I don't want to see Sims sacked, as it is a brilliant character in our sport. Just educate him. So for me, there's a few things in there. You know, obviously the Sheffield Steelers put out a short statement not that long after the incident, and we've seen a new statement come out, you know, a far more detailed one. But the league, you know, haven't obviously put much out there, really, if anything. So do you think they should have been more proactive? And just secondly, obviously, on how Chris ends his question, do you think it is a case of educating, you know, Dave Sims to realise that you can't say something like that in today's society?
Every day is a school day, and my previous profession was as a trainer in a big company, and you can learn things all the time. And certainly, yes, I think Simsy should be educated. He should maybe be in touch with Stonewall. So, you know, let's get some education. Let him see the damage of what he could say and what damage it can cause. Because I think Chris's response is fantastic. I think Chris's question is brilliant. He's a regular contributor to the show anyway, but I had no idea he was gay, and for him to come out and say that, I think he's brilliant, and to say he's not offended as well. However, I've seen many other people from the LGBT community who have said they were offended and were at the game on Saturday. And most people know my wife is a Sheffield Steelers fan. She was at the game, and she said there was no way that there was any malicious intent in what David Sims said. It was said in a joking manner. But as we've already discussed, you cannot joke about that sort of thing anymore. It's a really difficult one. I think the problem is the league is made up of the clubs. And for the league to have a statement, I suppose there's got to be a conference call of all the 10 clubs to put something together. And who is the chairman of the league? It's Tony Smith, who happens to be the chairman of the Sheffield Steelers. I agree that the original statement that was put out by the Steelers on Monday was totally inadequate. I think if they'd have put the one they put out today first, that would have been far, far better received. I think what people are hoping, and it's certainly what I'm hoping, is that this isn't swept under the carpet. There is some sort of outcome from all this, and it needs to be a positive outcome from all this, because this has been a horrendous horrendous week for British ice hockey with this. It's awful publicity. It's gone over to the USA on Puck Daddy, and that publicity is damaging, and something does need to be done about this. Something needs to happen. There needs to be an outcome, whether that be Simsy goes for education and training, whether he's eventually fired, whether he's dismissed, whether he resigns. There has to be an outcome, because for all this furore, if nothing happens, it's just going to build and build and build and get worse, and the league and the club are going to look toothless, and that can't happen. Something has to come from it, because there's so much damage that has been done, and I think it does need something from the league to say that this sort of thing isn't acceptable.
I think as well, it's come at an even worse. And don't get me wrong, it would never be a good time, but considering the amount of publicity that the You Can Play scheme in the NHL has had, and how fantastically received it's been, and then literally like days after that campaign has finished, and people are still talking about the great things about what's happened, this happens. I don't think that helps in the slightest, because it really does show us in the light that it should show us, because it is poor, but it really sort of sets us back even further because of the great strides that are being done across the pond.
I think you make a great point there, Andy, to be honest. And also, Jono, in your reply to Chris's kind of question, and Tina, the words we don't want to hear when talking about the Elite League are toothless, and words like that, do we really? So, as Jono says, there has to be an outcome, whatever that outcome may be. But does this kind of add to the whole? As Jono says, Tony Smith is the Elite League chairman at the moment, who is obviously, the owner of the kind of club in question to a certain degree. It just kind of again brings up the whole subject of that we need that independency, don't we, running our sport. So an incident like this can be kind of dealt with without having to, as Jono put it, do a conference call and get everybody's kind of views and opinions.
Well, yeah, it would be lovely, but this is the situation that we're in. So the Elite League have to deal with that. The Elite League board is made up of the owners and GMs of the various teams. They have to be prepared for whatever's thrown their way, because this is the situation that we're in at the moment. Just to sort of go off on a tangent a little bit, I think unfortunately we've had these articles that have gone out across the Atlantic. I think we've also had we've been on the receiving end of, as a result of that, of some very bad journalism. I've seen one particular article that has blatantly taken a photo of a gay couple who are kissing at a sports event and used that as the picture, and the headline is completely wrong, and the story is completely wrong. The story references actually a gay couple, which that wasn't it. So the point there is that an event like this can spark off Chinese whispers journalism, because it goes halfway around the world and people pick out the bits that somebody else hasn't reported on, or they read between the lines of the initial article, and then five articles later you've got a story that couldn't be further from the truth. So that's the kind of avalanche that you have to deal with. And the Elite League needs to do something. They've largely left it up to the Steelers to do it. I mean, this is Tony Smith putting his Sheffield Steelers owner's hat on, as he says. But he has to. I think in this case, even though he is the chairman of the league, I think he would possibly have to step aside on this occasion, because if he if he sort of gets involved with it too much with the rest of the board, then it can just feel like a secondary Sheffield Steelers statement. That's the problem, and that's where we're at. Can't do anything about it. that's the reality of it. We'd love to have an independent board. We'd love to have an independent chairman, but the finance just doesn't exist for that sort of thing. So the board has to do as much as the board can, and if that means getting the GMs or owners of 10 Elite League teams onto a conference call, onto an emergency conference call to talk about how they're going to approach this, then unfortunately I think that's probably what they would have to do. Just as a little thing that's just sort of popped into my head, I could think of a way that this maybe could have all been avoided. Instead of, lads, that's disgusting, perhaps if you change it to something along the lines of, get a room, you avoid all of this, because that doesn't assume any kind of offence or gender. That's that you could say to any couple, and so I think a lot less people would have been offended by it. So perhaps education is the best way to go. I do kind of agree with Chris, because he says that Dave Sims is a character in our sport. He's certainly a character, and one thing I will say about him is he's passionate about the sport of ice hockey. So that's it. It's passion that we don't. I think it's passion we don't want to lose, but at the same time, it's passion that needs to be directed in the correct way.
Is Aaron still there?
I am there. Sorry, I do apologise. I actually muted myself for a second. Well, I did a little cough off air. I do apologise, but I'm back, as you can now tell.
I thought you'd fallen asleep.
No, nobody on this podcast fall asleep, do they, Andy Haywood? Right, as I was saying to myself, it seems, Richard Martin has been in touch with us. Thank you very much for getting in touch, Richard. And he just says, how many openly gay people do you know playing ice hockey? Struggling to find many / any. Why's that? I think obviously ice hockey is not the only kind of sport that kind of applies to. Football being probably the number one. It just seems that maybe in this country and this society, when it comes to sport, we have trouble accepting or just the knowledge of gay people playing sport in this country isn't widely.
I don't think it's a problem accepting. I think it just comes back to the sensitivity of the subject matter, and I think attitudes, and also there's like I was saying on Monday, there's an awful lot of fear around it because of existing attitudes and attitudes from years gone by, without wanting to sound like a cliche. I think the problem is it's still scary. Well, coming out to anybody is scary, but I think when you're in the public eye, I think it makes it more so.
Well, I think speaking for Andy and myself, because we both played hockey on the same teams, and I mean, Andy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I wasn't aware of anyone who in the team who was openly gay.
Not to my knowledge, no.
And I think the thing is, locker room talk is locker room talk, and when you sort of think back to it, to that time, it's like, if you were an openly gay male in that sort of environment, it would be very intimidating. When you think, I mean, Andy, I don't know if you agree with me, but
I think one of the things that I always find quite interesting regarding the why don't we have more openly gay people in sport, and it's the openly bit that obviously is the issue here. It's not. I'm sure that there are gay people within sport, but like you say, they choose not to broadcast it for a multitude of different reasons. But with regarding like that question, John, where you say we both played for the same hockey team, did I know anyone that was openly gay in the team? Now, ultimately, when you first meet people, you don't ask. It's people's private lives at the end of the day, and in my own personal opinion, I couldn't care less. And that's not taking an interest or anything like that. It's just that it's your own personal private life, and I don't think that there's. Yes, it would be nice. I'm sure it would be nice for people that are struggling to come to terms with coming out, whether that be to friends, family, colleagues, or anything like that. Because of the stigma, it would be nice if there were perhaps more role models. But by the same token, I'd like to think that there would perhaps come a time where none of this is even needed, because
I agree.
It's private life. It shouldn't matter.
No, and I'd agree with that. To be honest, it doesn't. Who you love and your sexuality doesn't change the person who you are, and it should never be like that. And
it's nobody else's business either, really.
Yeah,
it isn't, and it's just it's disappointing. It's disappointing that these conversations are still being had in today's world, really, because
just an interesting point on that, Aaron. I'm about to show my age a little bit, unfortunately, but I was when I was at college, I was a drama student. Now, you'll be hard pressed to find an industry where there is a higher concentration of gay people, male and female, I would venture. So 20 odd years ago, I was involved in an industry, if you will, where I was interacting with people of various sexualities on a daily basis. Meant absolutely nothing to me. I came from a comprehensive school where in an area where it's fair to say that even now it would probably be terrifying to be. I'd agree with that. Yeah, I mean, it would be terrifying as somebody who was gay to come out while you were at my school. I don't think anybody would have done it. But as soon as I got to college, it was like a whole different world. And even though it was something I'd never actually directly interacted with people who were gay, but as soon as I got to college, it was like, I don't care. It's just I really. And 20 years ago, that was my attitude. But I know the attitude of from whence I came, if you will. So this is something that I've grown up. I mean, very accepting of. I mean, even before, even when I was at school, if I'd have known somebody who was gay, wouldn't have bothered me in the slightest. I'm not bothered if I'm friends with somebody. It makes no difference to me who they fancy. It's of no issue to me. And so, even 20 years ago, we still had the sort of attitude that we kind of have now. I mean, as I said, it's slow progress. It's still going to be a battle for anybody who is a little bit different, shall we say. But, at some point, we're going to reach a point where it's not different. And I think that's kind of what we're aiming for.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that. I hope we look back on this podcast in the future and go, why was that even, sort of talked about in the way that we have talked about it? Because it's not an issue, and it's accepted. And
I think it's a case of everybody's different, and I think the sooner that we can accept that everybody's different, the world will be a much nicer place.
Here. I mean, just to kind of.
Johnny,
that's a very nice way to end this kind of segment. But I just kind of want to end it We have had in a question. It is quite, straight to the point. It is from a Ginler from the Cage Forum, and he asked, why hasn't Dave Sims been sacked yet? Johnny, you obviously mentioned earlier about how it shouldn't be swept under the carpet. So I think we're all in kind of agreement that this has to be dealt with, in whichever way that is. It has to be done sooner rather than later. Would you all kind of agree with that?
I don't think he should be sacked, for the simple reason because I think if he's sacked, he might then be made to look like a martyr. And I think educating him would be the way to go. And getting him on a course, getting him to probably spend some time with Stonewall, as I've already mentioned, that should be the way to go.
Okay, anybody? Yep.
My issue is, how many more times are we going to have to educate him on how many different subjects? The things that he's done don't directly offend me at all in any way, shape or form. Even when he stood at centre ice and was directing comments towards Bruce Richardson's Braid Clan fans about Panthers.
You could say it, I've got a beep.
It genuinely doesn't concern me, but I know it does to a lot of people. And it's, at the end of the day, it's not his first rodeo. And how many more times do we have to have these kind of issues? The last TCW podcast, Ask TCW podcast, or the one before, where once again we were talking about things that he's done and said that have made the league look ridiculous. It's not an isolated incident, unfortunately. And whilst I'd agree with regards, if this was a one-off incident, then yeah, I'd kind of agree. But I think the question from McGinley delves a lot deeper than what's happened in this past week. I think it's more to do with, how many more times and how many different things is this guy going to get away with? And when you sort of look at them objectively one by one, they're not too bad in the grand scheme of things, as much as they are wrong, and they are rightly he's castigated for it. But on the face of it, one at a time, you look at educating. But when you bundle them all together, you start thinking, well, come on, enough's enough, surely.
Tina, anything to add there, or shall we move on?
No, I think they've it's been covered very comprehensively. I'm happy to move on.
Okie dokie. Well, obviously we've spent a fair chunk of time talking about that incident, which was very prominent at the moment. But I would just like to say something that is very positive about the Elite League, and that is, go and visit the Manchester Storm website, because for all the bad press that we've had of late, and I'm talking as the Elite League, there was a little 2-year-old boy called Sebastian who had he's a little bit poorly. He suffers from Lee syndrome, and he had an amazing time thanks to obviously the Manchester Storm and the Belfast Giants. And in the past we have obviously seen the work of Blake's Wheels, another sadly poorly young lad that got to live out his dream, and that was with the Belfast Giants as well, but also the Sheffield Steelers involved. So yes, it has been a very dark week for the Elite League, and it needs to be dealt with. But also there are some good things going on in the Elite League, and if you can check out obviously the Storm video, and if you've not heard about the Blake's Wheels, then do search that as well, because like I say, for all the bad that we've just talked about there for half an hour, there is some good things going on as well, and it'll be nice if that is put out there into the public forum and domain as well.
I have just retweeted it on the Cat's Whiskers Twitter, so they will be able to see that.
There you go. Head to the at Cat's Whiskers Twitter and just have a look, because like I say, there is some good going on in the world as well, and it'll be good for that to be talked about and spoken about in the public domain. But right, we will end on one final question, because again it is quite topical, and obviously you talked about it on Monday's night show, I believe, briefly. And this one comes from Kenwyn Jones again, and he says, with the news this week about Milton Keynes and Storm, should we be worried that the league will soon be back to 10 teams, obviously going to 12 next season? But with that news, should we be worried about the stability of the league and going back to 10 teams? Just very quickly, all of you, just kind of your views on that very quickly. Andy, I'll start with you.
Well, what I will say is it's a good job that we talked about this in the WhatsApp group earlier on, because I'd have had no idea otherwise.
There you go.
Yeah, winging it again. But no, I don't think
you
so.
Love it. You love it.
I do. I think ultimately, I think if the league were going to accept Milton Keynes into the Elite League, there'd have to be a fairly big almost business plan, I would imagine, regarding the club. And yes, being sold doesn't necessarily take years and years and years to sort of come to fruition, and it could just happen, not necessarily at a drop of a hat, but could come relatively out of the blue after that they'd already decided that they were going to come up. But I don't think it's an issue for the time being. I think, again, it's a lot of sort of 2 and 2 making 5 in a lot of aspects. And I just think that, I think for now we'll see a relatively stable 12 teams for a few years at least. And obviously the Q&A with Neil Black, I don't think it's any sort of secret that the sort of hopeful end goal is to have more teams. I know he was talking about 14 being a lot better and a lot easier for arranging fixtures, and I know he mentioned that would be his ideal scenario with regards in where the league goes, and I can only imagine that if we are going to have a different number to 12, that realistically it will probably be going up rather than going down.
Tina, are you concerned 12 will go to 10?
Nah, not at all. I think Silver Blaze were very quick to put the statement out. But no, sorry, not quick. They were very comprehensive in their statement. They said, we're looking for buyers. However, we're not just going to sell it. We're not just going to sell off to anybody. We're not going to leave the teams high and dry. We are, we're fully committed to the teams until we sell. One thing Adam sort of said, with the increased overheads that Milton Keynes are going to have when they come up to the league. Adam was talking about that on Monday. Would that possibly be a worry? And I sort of countered it with saying, well, they've obviously got the Manchester Storm. They know what they're getting into. So, for me personally, not concerned in the slightest. I think they will hold good. They'll hold true to their word, and when the right people come along that can run these clubs, that's I think it's safe as houses at the minute.
Jono, safe as houses for you?
Yeah, I mean, the statement very clearly said that they want to concentrate on their core business, which is running ice rinks. That they are expanding. They've got rinks coming in Leeds. There's a temporary rink in Slough. I think they're looking at putting one in Bristol as well. That doesn't strike me as a company that's in any sort of trouble. I think it's just they want to concentrate on their core and leave that ice hockey teams to be run by third parties, but still within their rinks. So I personally don't think there is anything to worry about.
Okie dokie. Well, we will wrap it up there this week. Thank you very much to everybody that has sent in your questions. Quite a meaty one this week. And obviously there have been questions that you have sent in, and unfortunately due to time restraints we haven't managed to answer them, but fear not, we shall bump your questions over to next week's show and we will kick it off with your questions next week, so fear not, they will be answered. But thank you very much to the three of you for joining me this evening. So thank you, Tina.
TTFN.
Thank you, Andy. Andy's falling asleep. Oh no,
I'm on mute. Sorry, I said no words at all. Anytime.
God, who puts themselves on mute? Only idiots would do that. And finally, Jono, thank you very much to you too.
Toodle pip.
If you're going to any hockey this coming weekend, enjoy yourself. Safe travel to the Panthers fans that are going over to Belfast. And we will be back next week for the review week, the review weekend, the review weekend podcast on Monday, where we will obviously look back at Panthers Belfast weekend, and the STCW podcast will be back next Wednesday. But in the meantime, thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.